Hello, my name is Tiago, and today I'll be presenting the topic Development of a Custom Setup for Additive Manufacturing of High-Performance Thermoplastics. This presentation will be done within the framework of the 4th International Conference on Structural Integrity. This presentation is divided into 4 sections. In the first section, called Introduction, the motivation and objectives for this work will be described. Then, an overview of the fused filament method, including the main machine components, will be made, and finally the topic of high-performance plastics will be discussed. The second section, Methods, includes a description of the additive manufacturing equipment used as a baseline for the development of this project. Afterwards, a description of the extruder and heated bed chosen for the new equipment, and finally, the explanation for the developed heat chamber and the pointing of the additional developments made in order to make the printable workable. Then, the results will be presented in a third section, including the achieved machine capabilities and the result that produces parts. Finally, the conclusions drawn out from this work will be presented, and the prospects for future works will be discussed. To kickstart the introduction, I will discuss the motivation that powered this project. Currently, additive manufactured plastic parts are seeing a huge increase in use, mainly since they can be produced with great speed and ease when compared to other production methods. On top of that, there is also an increasing interest in using these additive manufactured parts as structural components with more demanding needs. And finally, we believe that the study of how far these plastic parts could go in terms of structural integrity would be of great interest to study. Having these factors in mind, we set the objective of developing an additive manufacturing equipment for high-performance plastics, such as PEEK or PEI, that would serve as an important stepping stone for future and extensive studies of parts produced by this method in these materials. The machine to be produced will use the fused filament fabrication method, or fused deposition modeling, as it is trademarked by the company Stratasys. This is a widely known method of extruding a continuous filament of thermoplastic to progressively form a part layer by layer. From the presentation of the original concept, which we can see in the figure, until today, we can say that the main components of this type of equipment remains pretty much the same, being them the extruder, the printing bed, the moving axis, and in some cases a chamber for printing in a controlled environment. Usually, FDM printers produce parts in materials such as PLA, PTG or ABS, but in the scope of this work, we are interested in going beyond these materials and produce a machine that can manufacture parts in high-performance plastics, which by definition are materials with working temperatures above 150 Celsius degrees, along with better chemical and mechanical properties. For this work, we have chosen to use PEEK and PEI as a reference for high-performance thermoplastics due to their higher availability. And, as seen in the presented table, we can see that both these materials have higher glass transition temperature and consequently higher printing temperatures, along with higher Young's modulus and yield and tensile strength when compared to standard materials. Entering the method section, I would like to initiate by presenting the starting point for this project. At the beginning of this project, it was decided the fastest and easiest way to execute our idea was to improve on an existing 3D printer we already had, a Cubex 3D printer. From this printer, we decided to keep the main structure and kinematics, meaning its axis, and came to the conclusion that the extruder and heated bed needed to be changed and that a heated chamber needed to be added, since the existing ones didn't reach the desired temperatures as seen in the presented table. Additionally, since the printer would be working inside a 100 Celsius degrees environment and the stepper motor should work below 50 Celsius degrees ambient temperature, a cooling system needed to be designed for motor cooling. Finally, since all the software and electronics from the existing printer were closed solutions, it was necessary to change them. Concerning the substitution of the extruder and the additive bed, we found that there were already solutions for these components available in the market. So we decided to go with them since they would be the solution with fastest implementation. After market research, we decided to go with the E3D solutions. For the extruder, we chose the E3D Titan Aqua, as it had water cooling, which was very important for us since this part would be working in a heated environment, which would impair an air cooling system. Other than that, the selected extruder can reach a temperature of 500 Celsius degrees, which goes in accordance with our previously defined requirements. The heated bed, we decided to go with the E3D high temperature heated bed, which has a glass surface and can reach a temperature of 200 Celsius degrees, also meeting the requirements defined. On a side note, for all the tests, we used the nanopolymer adhesive from Vision Miner. As already stated, we also needed a heated environment with controlled temperature. To reach this solution, we developed three subsystems. The first one was to develop an enclosure for our 3D printer using expanded polystyrene plus aluminum sheets. The second part was developing a PID control heating system using a heat gun which pumps air at around 300 Celsius degrees into the chamber. And finally, we added a radiation system using 6 35-watt bulbs as shown in the figure to provide some extra surface temperature in the produced part. Finally, there were two other major changes required. The first, the motor cooling to try and keep the winding temperature below 130 Celsius degrees, which would mean try and replicate an ambient temperature of about 50 Celsius degrees. For this, we implemented a liquid cooling system like the ones used for computer processors. The liquid used for this purpose was ethylene glycol. Apart from that, and as the 3D printed we used as a baseline was a closed solution in terms of software, we implemented a new control unit. There were several boards available for this process, but we chose to go with the Do-It2 Wi-Fi, which is a solution that comes with open source software which should allow us to make all the changes and experiments necessary. Now moving on to the results achieved with the implemented setup. Firstly, we'll start by pointing out the achieved machine capabilities in terms of temperature performance. As stated by the manufacturer, the extruder reaches a temperature of 500 Celsius degrees, and the heated bed reaches a temperature of 200 Celsius degrees. The air in the chamber reaches up to a temperature of 110 Celsius degrees. In terms of surface temperature, with the printing conditions of having the chamber at 100 Celsius degrees and the heated bed at a temperature of 200 Celsius degrees, we measure the surface temperature in the part in the position shown in the figure, a temperature of 123 Celsius degrees without the radiation system and of 154 degrees with the light system turned on. And with a maximum reached temperature in the environment, we measured a motor temperature in its surface of 57 Celsius degrees, which we deem to be acceptable since a good estimation for winding temperature is adding 30 Celsius degrees to the surface temperature, which leaves us at around 90 Celsius degrees, which is well below the 130 Celsius degrees which is deemed to be the maximum for winding temperature. So, in general, we could state that our machine reaches all the specified requirements to produce parts in the high-performance plastics defined. In terms of the part produced, we were successful in producing parts in both pay and peak. The results from all the parts produced are shown in the table. Concerning the pay produced parts, after 4 trials and some adjustments, we were able to produce a part which we deemed to be in good working condition. The best printing setup experimented is the one described in the table at the bottom, in which we had the extruder temperature at a temperature of 370 Celsius degrees, the bed temperature at 200 Celsius degrees, the chamber temperature at 100 degrees plus the lighting system, a velocity for both in fill and parameters at 30 mm per second, an infill of 10%, and use 4 perimeters as solid layers. The only defects noted was the presence of some ringing effect and some small zones with little discoloration, which we believe to be due to some humidity in the filament. We also had some consistent dimensional variation in the parts. Concerning the peak produced parts, after 3 trials and some adjustments, we were able to produce parts that we deemed reasonable. The best printing setup experiment is the one described in the table at the bottom, in which we have the extruder temperature of 380 degrees, a bed temperature of 155 degrees, the chamber temperature of 100 degrees without the light system, a velocity for perimeters of 20 mm per second, a velocity of infill of 10 mm per second, an infill of 10%, and use 4 perimeters as solid layers. The defects noted in the best part producing using peak was a slight warping effect and 3 small delaminations. Apart from that, we also noted some consistent dimensional variation in the parts and some ringing effect. Summing up, the conclusions taken from this work were the following. A custom setup for additive manufacturing of high-performance thermoplastics was developed. Parts were produced in both peak and pay. The printer has the adequate capabilities for printing parts in both peak and pay. Still, some mechanical improvements are still needed. We had ringing in all the parts, which means we should try to reduce the vibrations in our printer. We also had consistent dimensional variation, which will be corrected by calibrating the axis. And also, some printing parameter optimization is still needed. For Prey, we still need to improve our drying process. And for Peak, we still need to try and solve our warping and elimination problems, and improve our bed adhesion. But in general, we believe that we were able to produce a capable printer as it was the objective for this work. Regarding future works, apart from the optimization of the current machine and of the printing process, we will be moving on to the study and mechanical characterizations of the parts produced in this printer. And this will be all for my side. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, they are always welcome.